I want to say how glad I am to see all of you and to welcome you as a formal welcome. Most of you know I'm the Adult Programs Director at First Church in Belmont, and we are so glad to be having this program today. It is something that I care a lot about. Is theater important to our democracy is the name of the program. And we are very, very grateful for our panelists who will be joining us today, and many of you know them, and they are Jane Minassian and Downing Kless, and I mentioned Val Frank, but he's not here, and Jackie Neal. And so I'll give a little introduction, but before I do, I just want to say that it would probably be a good idea for you to mute yourselves when the speakers are talking and when we're watching this 13.5-minute TED Talk by Oskar Eustis, who is the Public Theater Artistic Director in New York City. And I found when I first saw this TED Talk that I was absolutely captivated by it. He's a wonderful speaker, and I think you're going to enjoy it. It's not very long, so you won't get bored with it. And then after the TED Talk is over, we will have our panelists respond in their own way with their own experiences to what Oskar Eustis has to say. And so just to give you by way of introduction in the order in which they're going to be speaking and responding, we have Downing Kless. And you know, most of you know this, but Downing was the drama department chair at Northeastern. No, at Tufts, I'm sorry. We have so many academics, it's very difficult for me to remember which institution, but at Tufts, and it was then the drama department and dance department that you were chair of. Downing has also been on the board of the Central Square Theatre in Cambridge. And so we're very grateful that you're here with your background and expertise. Then we have Jane Minassian, who has been one of the driving forces of keeping theater alive at First Church by having a group of people who have in the past gone to the theater and then responded to going to those theatrical productions. And she also is currently on the board of the Central Square Theatre. And we have Jackie Neal, who many of you know has spent a great many hours over the years as the social action chair at First Church and has been involved with many, many productions of Eve Ensler's works. So you're going to be hearing from her. And we have Val Frank, who, as I mentioned before, is currently at the Huntington Theater as a sound engineer. And so he is delayed, but he will be here with us as soon as he can get away. And so I'm just checking to see whether he's jumped on. He hasn't. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to collectively together watch this TED Talk. And I didn't have a chance to really check out the sound, but you can let me know if in fact there's a problem, and I can see what I can do about it. So I'm going to do my screen share and we'll watch this together. And then I want you to also think, as you're watching, about this. When was the last time you were actually in the theater? Because it's been a while for most of us. And so I want you to carry that memory of live theater as you're watching this TED Talk. Okay, I'm sorry that you only had to watch it on a small screen, but at least you got to watch it, right? Okay, unmute yourselves first of all, because I think this is, well, actually, we're going to hear from our panel first. So you can mute yourself until we have an opportunity to hear from you. So let's start with Downing. And I hope you've enjoyed that TED Talk, because I think he mentions a lot of different aspects of life in the theater. And so we're going to hopefully get to all of them. So why don't you start, Downing, and we'll see what your response to that TED Talk is.
Well, I think that there are amazing abilities of theater to get to people and the public. And, you know, I think of examples of, you know, the San Francisco Mime Troupe for 50 years now has performed in the parks of San Francisco, around the whole Bay Area all summer long. And to get to people that do not normally go to theater. And that's certainly been true with the public theater's Shakespeare in the Park program too. And so you're elevating the 14% beyond a cultural elite, okay? And I say the 14%, there now are 14% of the population who have seen live theater last, well, 2 years ago or whenever it last happened. And that's way up from, like, back in the 1980, it was around 2%, okay, 2%. So you know, the popularity and the ability of theater to reach a broader population has increased, definitely. The other thing is, can theater really foment change? And occasionally that does really happen. The example he gave of Larry Kramer's The Normal Heart, Larry Kramer never would have known when he created that play and first produced it, the impact it was going to have. I mean, it became enormous in actually spurring the AIDS movement in New York City and way all throughout the country, actually, because it got numerous productions, many of them by smaller community groups in cities throughout the country. And so it became this cultural phenomenon. And occasionally that'll happen with a play. But overall, we don't have the kind of forum for theater that you know, the Greeks had, for instance, where it really was a coming together in a religious festival that the, you know, and so there was a lot of interchange beyond the play itself. Now we do get that now through talkbacks. Those have become pretty prevalent in the last 30 years. And when I started in theater, they almost never happened. And so normally the norm now is that you have a talkback after the play with the audience who want to stay and talk. And at the least, you hope that people are talking about it as they walk out and drive away. And then I think there is the potential where theater has a more direct impact and is actually coordinated with social action. And that's really more what Oscar's talking about, for instance, in the tour of Lynn Nottage's play, that they'll really coordinate with communities, activist groups, with community centers, that sort of thing, to really get the dialogue going. And I think of the work that the Underground Railway Theater, which I was associated with for many years before they headed to Central Square Theater, used to do a lot of touring of plays that could be used for organizing. So for instance, we did 2 what we called eco cabarets, and those went out to communities that were organizing around environmental actions. We had one of the 2 eco cabarets dealt a lot with firsthand monologues that we had gotten from people in those communities that were dealing, particularly frontline communities that were dealing with pollution. For instance, there was a wonderful monologue by a man named Amos Favorite, who was organizing down in St. James Parish in what's called Cancer Alley down in near Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And that, by the way, that organizing is still going on now with a new generation of people, because the plastics industry keeps building plants and keeps polluting that area.
So, Downing.
So anyway, just to finish up that coordination with an actual activist, the best example I can think of in this country was Teatro Campesino, which was the farm workers theater. It went around on flatbed trucks and was truly a part of the organizing of the United Farm Workers, and particularly the grape boycott, which many of you may remember way back a long time ago in the 60s. So that's what I would say, that all can happen. It doesn't happen enough.
Yeah, and I think that leads very well into what Jackie is going to talk about, because when you mentioned monologues, that's exactly what Eve Ensler did. So Jackie, why don't you just continue on that in that?
Sure. I'll talk about my experience, which was about, I think it was about 2012, 2013. I had just retired from working for too many years. And a friend of mine who had been performing in a community group, performing the vagina monologues, kept asking me year after year, come see me, come see me. And I thought, okay, I'm finally retired. I can do this. I'm a big girl. I can go see this. And I took myself to see the play. And the play is performed in the month of February, for those of you who don't know, which is V month, and I will explain all of that. So there I was in Central Square at the YMCA Theater, watching the vagina monologues, and in between each monologue, they gave statistics about what is happening in the world today regarding violence and abuse against women and girls. And I thought I was a pretty sophisticated woman, and I sat there in shock. And I said to myself, I can't just sit here. I have to do something about this. I can't just walk out of here and not do something. And I spent the next few months trying to figure out what it was I could do. And it was also combined with, how I was going to use my time now that I was retired. And I found myself going to the Social Action Committee at the church. And I introduced the idea to the committee about doing some work with this organization that had sort of developed out of the vagina monologues, which was called V-Day. Was anybody interested in working with me? And I think every woman in the room raised her hand. And that's what started it. We got together and we educated ourselves to what has become a national organization and a really call to action to educate the community on violence and abuse against women. And the theater has been the platform for this. And it started with Eve Ensler, who is the playwright, with this idea to go around and speak with women about their experience about love and sex and violence and abuse. And she took their monologues, their sayings, and created this play. And at first she performed it solo, and it became so popular that other actors and actresses started to join her. And then it was such demand that they started to travel. And then college campuses started to ask if they could perform. And then theaters, and it is now a national organization that I believe raises more money than any other nonprofit in the nation to assist with violence and abuse against women. And every performance that is done, you need to partner with a local nonprofit that is supporting women who have experienced violence and abuse. So it brings people together in such a way that is really very powerful. And when we started to do it at First Church, and some of you will remember the posters, I don't know if you can see my button, but this was the image that we created, and it was done by a member of the church, Amelia Farrell, who's an artist. And it was just one of these things. The committee was meeting in a coffee shop. Amelia walked in. We said we needed some help, and the next day this was created. I mean, that's the kind of thing that happened around the development of the production. Anyway, I've lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Thank you, Jackie. I think that is such a wonderful example of not only your particular, you being moved to action, but also what a gift you gave the church and in building community, because I think those of us who have done theater understand at its core that it's about building community. And so, and I'm sure there will be more questions to you specifically when we're done hearing all of the panelists. So Jane, do you want to jump in now? And I know Val has joined our call. Thank goodness. We're glad that you're here too. Would you like to go last, Jane, or do you want to go
No,
next?
I'm happy to jump in.
Okay.
Thank you. And what Jackie and Downing shared, super interesting, super motivating. I think it really speaks to the power of theater to, as Oskar said, hold a mirror up to our humanity and motivate people and put a dialogue of different points of view on the stage to shine a light on, current day issues. And when it results in people actually taking action, I think that's the highest and best result. I think just to unpack a little bit of what Oskar was talking about, I mean, he spoke about many, many different things. He talked about conflict, of having different points of view in conflict on stage is the way to lead to the truth. He spoke about the exercise of empathy, just seeing yourself in someone else's shoes as it's presented. And he spoke about the community of being in an audience. And I think that when I think of theater as compared to other art forms, let's say, if you want to call TV an art form or literature or even comparing it to the news, I mean, theater does have a kind of intimacy and immediacy that I think does stir people. And I'm not saying that great literature and a good news story and a great TV show doesn't. I do think theater it does have that immediacy when you're sitting and watching other people in person. It is different. And I think just following along the idea of theater as social action, obviously not every form of theater does what we're talking about. I mean, there's musicals, there's improv, there's comedy, there's many, many types of theater. And, increasingly we've seen this more social action theater and docu-theater where you're listening to the actual words of other people taken from interviews like Anna Devere Smith. And so I think there's many, many forms of theater, and all of them do hold a mirror up in some way to our life and our humanity over time. But I think what Downing and Jackie spoke about is also what Oskar is getting at when talking about culture being available and being the way of showing truth. and he talked a lot about the barriers to participation, which really interest me. And I can talk about that a little later, Lillian, if you want, because I am questioning a little bit about the balance of opinion that's presented in theater. And I'm also interested in chatting about whether a medium like television and the writing that's done on TV has the potential to change more minds because it's so much more accessible. And I think it's great if it's at 14% now, but I think compared to television, it's still low. And compared to what parts of the country it reaches, it's very different. I think theater and culture in the big urban areas, much more accessible in the blue areas. So anyway, those are things I'm happy to touch on later or now or whenever, but those were some of the questions that I was trying to
Yeah, I think
explore a little.
let's hold that, and because I think we might have some other people who might respond to that. Val, do you want to jump in now? I'm going to just make sure that you're here. Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and we do know that you're working at the Huntington Theater, and any thoughts that you might have to share about what you've heard Oskar Eustis say, and bring it into the current situation that you are experiencing as a member of the Huntington Theater staff.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, it's great to see everyone. I recognize the irony of missing the first part of this because of a theater production, and specifically, as Downing was saying, there's a talkback happening on the other side of that wall right now. So very much the forum of theater happening as we speak. Yeah, it's a shame that Jane went straight before me because that's a lot of words taken right out of my mouth. I think theater has a very uniquely empathetic angle. And I think that's something that a lot of us kind of feel when we're in contact with it. I think it comes both from the immediacy of it, the fact that you know that this isn't just the best take, the way if you watch a movie or a TV show. And it's, while it is scripted, they don't have the script in front of them. There's so many things, there's so many ways any moment could go. And being in the room in that one moment on this one day does have a certain connection that is unique to it, and makes it a vehicle for many things, and gives it that unique empathy. I think one of the examples that Oskar uses that I think I connect with a lot is he mentioned the production of Lynn Nottage's Sweat, which we did at the Huntington in February 2020. And that has such a specific set of, not as much messages. I don't think it has an agenda, but it just wants to show a specific set of characters and a specific set of experiences. And I think specifically wants to build a certain amount of empathy between the people that experience the difficulties that are shown in the play and people that can't imagine how difficult those experiences are because they haven't experienced, because that's not part of their lived experience. And that's great. That's wonderful. It's important to build those connections. But I think one thing that interests me on, I guess, a level more fundamental is how do we take that type of power or potential and bring it forward into, as we mentioned, there's lots of kinds of theater. There's theater that at a surface level isn't there to teach us anything, but just to entertain. How do we make that part of the same dialogue, of the same process, of the same, in the same ability to feel a certain amount of empathy towards people and experiences and situations that you don't see. And so working in the theater itself, one of the big parts of that is to take, even when we are doing a play that doesn't have a strong message of social action, that doesn't have a strong thing that it's trying to teach us, and treat it as with all the sincerity that you would do with something that has a very strict point of social action, and be very deliberate about who are we putting on stage to tell that story, no matter what that story is, and who are the people working behind the scenes, and what is the atmosphere like backstage, and what is kind of the months of pre-production, because that all, even though not all of that is spelled out for the audience. It does change how a show is done. And so if you can have the most revolutionary, brilliant, progressive thinking piece of like show made, if it's not done with the same with the integrity and sincerity behind that, it's not going to come across because it's not just the text, it's not just the props, it's not just the sound. It's about that parasocial, perhaps, but still genuine connection between artist and person experiencing the art in that moment. And so I think what really interests me and what is, how do we take that same intent, that same ability, and make sure that in the same deliberate way that we consider wow, it's been a long day. There goes my train of thought. Yeah, it's
Okay,
that's kind of what interests me. It's top to bottom thoughtfulness about how we use this form of expression and who is involved in making it happen.
Yeah, that's an important point. And I would love everybody to just unmute yourselves and get into gallery view right now so that we can actually jump in more spontaneously than we have. And especially, Jane, if you want to have another go round in terms of thoughts, I'd love to hear what you have to say. I think that that production at the Huntington was the last production I have been in the theater for. And Jane, did we do that as a group at First Church? Did we choose Sweat as a play that we went to see?
I think we did. I mean, because I certainly went to see it, and I thought it was really well done. I think we did discuss it.
Yeah, I saw it too.
Yeah, okay, so that's good. Well, that may be the last memory any of us have about being in the theater. So and I'd love to hear from anybody who has any response. Jean, go right ahead.
Well, one of the things I feel first off blessed for is I'm really interested in the concept of children and the democracy of when are we introducing youth, to the theater. And obviously First Church, we've had that, with musicals of that sense of community. But that I'm curious at some point, or Downing or Jane are talking about, the funding for the arts. Our kids pick up musical instruments, in their third grade or fourth grade. And I know, but the sense of when are we making this concept of voice and story very important? Because I feel like I grew up, it was like, okay, well, I'm not good enough to do that. I don't have a singing voice, or I'm shy. And so, we're talking about, adults going to the theater, but I'm quite interested in, if we're kind of elevating the concept of theater and democracy, is how is that innate in where we're bringing that up in youth. And finding that available, and the funding for even our schools. So
that's a really big question. That's like a whole nother program. That's really important. It really is. I'm not sure do any of our panels. Well, Downing, you've been involved in the teaching.
Or Val's got it.
So Val,
I mean, I jump in and say that I think there is some use of theater and theater improvisation, particularly being taught just to teachers in general, in other words, for history teachers or, even math teachers, I suppose.
Right.
And that there is some use of theater as a vehicle there. More specifically, there are programs, interestingly, Tufts has the oldest theater of and by children in New England. It goes back into the 1940s, I think it is. And then Underground Railway Theater has always, throughout its over 40-year history now, had a youth program that works on youth workshops with kids locally. And that's very much a part of the Central Square Theater. Jane can maybe say a little bit about what's been going on there recently. In fact, I know there's been a whole thing connected to Cambridge Ringen Latin High School, I think, and Jane can maybe say more about that, that relates to voting and citizenship. I think that's right.
So Val, were you going to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a fun story about kind of the way that we introduce especially younger children to theater. And that's so a couple years ago, I was working at a summer theater in upstate New York. And there's always the kind of the main shows in the evening, but during the afternoons, we would have children's shows. And essentially the apprentice actors and designers that were understudies during the main shows were the main performers and artists for these children's shows. And there was a whole lineup of shows, and one of the plays picked out went through a bit of a development disaster. The director was fired shortly after selecting the play, and we had to scramble to put everything together. And 3 weeks out from when the play was supposed to open, the new director finally got the script and had a chance to read through it, and realized very unfortunately that this script was actually kind of terrible and frankly quite racist. The play, it was called Lewis and Clark and Other Plays from Way Out West, and had some very, very questionable portrayals of a number of things. And at that point, it was too late for us to change the plays because we had already bought the rights and had started most of the pre-production process. And it was too late to cancel it as well because we'd already sold a bunch of tickets, and local summer camps and schools had already made deals with us. But we didn't feel comfortable presenting the play as it was in the messaging. And it ended up being this very interesting way, kind of a dilemma to figure out what to do. And what we ended up doing is we presented the play metatextually. So instead of literally presenting these little stories, these vignettes playing during the mid to late 19th century, the play was presented as a book of US history crash lands on an alien planet, and the aliens are reading out of this book and learning these stories and responding to them. And the whole costume design was changed. They were all in colorful morph suits with giant, very, very, very strange, but interesting, wonderful, wonderful type of strange project. And it was very interesting to see the responses to this play because the students we had actually coming to it were grades 1 through 5. Very much the one where you don't really have metatextual analysis that you're feeding to that, and it was an enormous success because the limiting factor in terms of what you show to students that age is age appropriate material. We've just drawn some lines, and B, life experience, that it might be a bit much there. But that doesn't mean that students at that age aren't able to kind of have this idea of a narrative isn't just one thing. It can be and just because you're seeing or hearing a story doesn't mean you can't think about it positively and negatively and critically and affirmatively at the same time. And since then, the theater has done a really interesting, they've changed their mission statement regarding theater and children, where it's less there to entertain and to introduce them to the medium, and much more of a theater can both be challenging and entertaining, and it can be incidentally challenging. It doesn't need to be provocative in order to be mentally involved in that way.
So I have a quote actually that goes along with this by Willem Dafoe, who said, "Great theater is about challenging how we think and encouraging us to fantasize about a world we aspire to." And I think that actually is quite important, because it doesn't just say, here's where we are. It says, this is where we can go, and we can be something other than where we are. To dream, to aspire is a very important part of theater. But and to move you into action, as Jackie was moved into action, is essential. You know, every good piece of theater that you've ever seen has that emotional component, so that you are not, I won't say transformed by every play you've seen, but certainly the potential is there. And what about what Oskar Eustis said about being in that theater together? What about that? Because when I hear Jane talk about TV, and I'm a big TV watcher, you don't get that same experience as you do when you're in a group with a bunch of people, right? I mean, that's what sets theater apart. So Kathy, go ahead, and then Derek.
Okay, I had a just two quick things. The first one was in terms of Central Square Theater and children. I have a granddaughter who goes to the Cambridgeport School, and when she was in the 3rd grade, they did Revolutionary War, and they worked with the Central Square Theater to actually hold their final productions there. And for these 3rd graders, it was just awesome. I mean, so I really applaud that for their involvement with children in the community. The other is that I have a brother who lives in Western Mass, and he's very involved in climate change, among other things. And for the last couple of Thursday nights, he has been going to Greenfield, and they have been doing what are called 50 climate action plays or something to that. And there have been 50 plays written. They're 5-minute plays, and whoever is in attendance goes up on stage, and they're all given their script right then and there. It's just a read play. They just read it, and each one is 5 minutes. And until I saw this TED Talk, I kind of didn't get that, but I'm thinking what a profound experience it is for the people who are able to go and be part of numerous plays that are short, quick, about climate change. And that's kind of what he was getting at, as opposed to big, expensive productions that few people, in the rural communities can see. So
Yeah. Derek, did you have something?
Yeah, couple things. One, when I, in the last few years of I was chair of the Communication Arts Department at Framingham State University, and we were trying to build a increased theater presence. And so I decided, well, I should go see some more theater. And so I started going to a lot more plays than I had before. And my reaction was that I went to one, it was a musical, and I thought, I don't like musicals. What am I doing here? But I also got choked up almost immediately. And I realized that the reason I was moved by it and loved it was the same reason that I'm now a sculptor, rather than a digital photographer, because I like physical stuff. And so it was a sense, yes, of being with an audience in the presence of other human beings doing this thing together. And that was enormously powerful. And that means that's why you've got to take it on a flatbed and go out into the boondocks, as it were, because you can't just make a movie of it, because then it's just a movie. The other thing is it's springing off from this question of finding out a play is racist. Yeah, I went to the theater. I just looked it up. September 30th, the BCA Plaza Theater did Merchant of Venice. And you always wonder, well, how are they going to manage that? Well, here's a play that you'd note, surprise, surprise, it's anti-Semitic. And everybody sort of knows that. And I think what happened here is that, unfortunately, to my taste, I loved being there and I loved a lot of the performances, but the director had sort of taken it upon himself, it seemed to me, to prove that yes, indeed, Shakespeare was an anti-Semite, and rather than anti-Semitism was a bad thing, whatever. So I thought it intruded itself on the place. The play wasn't the thing. It was the sort of director's screed about the play and its historical background. But anyway, it was still very good to be there. And it was great to see these people performing really up close, even though we all had masks on. So that's enough for me.
Jane, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I guess first I just wanted to share briefly that I did see 2 plays in the past 2 weeks that both were very moving and very enlightening. I saw To Kill a Mockingbird on Broadway, and it was very different from the book, and it really spoke that the new dialogue and approach really spoke to the polarization in our country right now, and it sort of gave a platform for trying to understand the different points of view of some of the, poor rural farmer. You didn't like him, but you saw him differently than you might have in the book, I thought. And the other play was at Central Square Theater called Queen's Girl in the World, which explores the childhood of a young African-American girl in the 1950s and her grappling with her identity as, trying to be educated and be in a private school, but also be part of her Black community. And it was very enlightening. And again, theater that shows different points of view. And, I think the missions of theater have to do with all the things we're talking about: questioning, revealing, interrogating, transforming. But to get back once again to Oskar and Oskar's saying we've turned our back on people and theater and culture needs to be accessible to everyone. And I thought his, much of his speech was inspiring, but to me, a bit of it kind of echoed this noblesse oblige. We, the guardians of this liberal truth, are going to shine a light and bring it to these rural red communities. And so to me, it was a little different from how he started, with democracy being sort of equal time for equal positions on stage, right? It's all about the dialogue to get to the truth. And I'm not so sure, and again, I'm not advocating for, the takeover of conservative theater, but as far as theater goes, I think there is very little conservative messaging to balance what we're saying we need to bring across the country to enlighten and show, our side, or whatever, the liberal side. And so I actually was curious about this. So I noodled around a little bit. And this question of, is there conservative theater? Are there conservative playwrights? I found very interesting, and how would we feel about theater? Let's say that the Huntington was, hired or brought a conservative play about, pro-life, or about, fear of immigration. And, would anyone go to see it? And is that the kind of truth on stage we want to expose ourselves to, so that we understand how other people feel? Or do we only want to hear what liberal playwrights are putting into the mouths of their characters? And I'm not saying that every playwright is liberal, and I think a lot of plays do unpack multiple points of view, but like every news story, like every piece of art, the creator, has some ultimate goal and agenda. So when I was looking online a little bit about this, there were questions like, where are the offensive plays we're not doing? Or, have we closed the doors to people who don't think like we do? Or, not doing other types of plays limit theater's effectiveness and relevance because it cuts out half the audience. And I just thought that was something interesting to consider about this idea that if we bring our work to other people, of course, they will change their minds. And I do think theater has the potential to change minds, but I just think the attitude that, that the theater is mostly in the large liberal cities. Like New York, like San Francisco, like Chicago, wherever. So I guess this question of how it becomes democratic and how everybody gets to hear both sides in a way that creates empathy is my question and my concern.
Rachel, go right ahead.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Jane, for saying that. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And
I
do you
also,
want to respond to that, and then Rachel?
oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Jane. I also saw Queen's Girl in the World, and we've seen also Sweat. So, so we have been to the theater, and I love to do it for many years. And I think what you said reminded me of some of the analysis of the 2016 election, where many of the people who surprisingly voted for Donald Trump seemed to be doing so in looking at it later because of distrust or disdain for the people that seem to know everything, that have everything and sort of determine the culture. And so they feel that they're being talked down to. And I think that's a very difficult problem, is to reach people that you want to reach without talking down to them, without being the smart people that bring something nice to people without doing that. I don't know the answer, but I think that's one of the dilemmas that we face.
Yeah. Rachel, do you want to jump in?
Well, I think, Jane, you asked some really provocative questions. And in your first remarks, you brought up the news, and then you brought up the news again just now, but that's not, I want to comment on that. But I think as I was listening to you ask your questions about what kind of stories would we want to entertain, I know this, well, I don't know. I don't sense this is where you were going, but what it triggered in my mind was the kind of conversation that was going on 5-10 years ago about, well, of course we want to hire people of color. Of course we want, art from people of color, but we can't find any. Like, it's not readily available. That there was this kind of dynamic that then got busted open in a lot of different ways. And now, now it's like very much, well, obviously we can find stories, and obviously we can find talent, and obviously all these sorts of things. So I guess I'm noodling on this idea that theater has its particular nuances, but it's a way of telling story. And there are so many wonderful stories out there that I'd say the mass of them are under the surface. And that if the will and the intention would be to seek out a story that really pushed thinking, we'd have to decide if that was, the theater community or the writer community or whoever's community would have to figure out if there was enough intention and will to do that and put it forward in front of the audience. The thing I wanted to pick up on with the news is this idea that if I'm in a theater watching a play, my emotions are being drawn out or sometimes manipulated to feel certain ways. And that can be cathartic. And I almost feel like there's all this performance in the news right now where I feel like I'm being hit over the head with the exact same story over and over and over and over again, to the point where I'm now angry at a lot of major news. Like I feel like I'm only being told one story, and I'm sure there are other stories out there. So I guess they do kind of fit together in this idea that like I am a theater goer and a news reader and a story reader who's hungry for really different stories, but not that manipulate me. If that makes sense.
Yes, Val.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting I think one of the important things when considering the idea of what are the kind of the stories that we're not telling is that ideology isn't the same thing as identity. There are many different life experiences that someone can go through and all still agree on the same ideology. You can have lots of different types of people from different places with different backgrounds and experiences that are all conservative, and likewise for liberal. And I feel like if we try to emphasize to put different a specific variety of ideologies on a stage, you're always going to kind of create an in-group and an out-group. And I think very much to the critique of theater for a lot of modern history, there has been that divide where it has felt like it is a generally liberal institution, both by virtue of it generally being centralized in liberal areas, and the types of works that have reached success recently. But I feel like if we kind of went out of our way to elevate contrary voices, I don't know if that necessarily would create balance. I think what we're trying to reach for is to present the life experiences that are different from maybe what we associate with liberally minded theater. I don't think that adding more conservative thought or conservative ideology is necessarily good, because then it's just a flipped version. I think what we should definitely show in new theater is more conservative characters and conservative life experiences, because I think that would much more effectively break through a sort of a hegemonic idea of what modern storytelling on stage is. Because I think when you see people who really feel alienated by modern, like the what is currently shown on Broadway, isn't so much that there's a specific agenda. Because I think if you line up the what is it, 25 theaters currently open on Broadway, I don't think there's one political agenda that all of those follow. I do think there's certain trends of the types of experiences they show, and the types of human beings, the types of there's definitely parts of the country that are not represented by the life experiences of new plays coming out at the moment. And I think in there's that mismatch of if we were to show a more cohesive picture of both the country and also just the world at large, I think we have a very America-centric view of theater. I think that would go further towards, I kind of hate the phrase healing the divide, but in this sense, I kind of mean it very genuinely, of breaking down those barriers.
I think that's a very, very interesting and important point to make. And in fact, hopefully at some point, we're going to be doing a program on education. Because do you want to present the alternative view to everything? And I think that's not what you were saying, Jane. I think that these are very nuanced points of view here, but very important ones, because we don't want to, as Unitarian Universalists, we want to question a lot of what assumptions are. And I think that's where you were starting, Jane. Anybody else? Yeah, Jackie, go ahead, jump in.
I just wanted to point out that even though there may be differing views and backgrounds being presented, it does not necessarily mean that it's going to be perceived as balanced. And my examples are the Eve Ensler plays that we did. The Memory Monologue, Rant, and a Prayer are stories that she solicited from well-known writers or people that she knew about violence and abuse. And they were from a range of people, a range of backgrounds, a range of cultures, and a range of experiences. Same was true with Vagina Monologues. She went around the country and interviewed over 200 women from all different cultures, all different backgrounds, all different economic experiences. And those monologues and those stories are such a huge range, but yet her plays are considered radical and considered, revolutionary and anti-male, and all kinds of issues have been brought up about it. So even though those backgrounds are represented and clearly represented in the monologues, that does not necessarily mean that that's how it's perceived. Because people hear what they want to hear. And how you express it is also, I think, important. I mean, I know that not only did I help produce them, I read some of the monologues, and you internalize it. I mean, I was reading about a mother who saw her son be shot on a documentary. It was so powerful for me to have to read that and to feel that, and that's what's happening with everyone who's reading those monologues. you are internalizing it. And I'm sure that's true with actors across the board. It's very, very powerful.
Yep. Yes, Ariane.
Yes, I just have one little comment, and I think when we, I have to change this audio setting a little bit. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think when we strive to like broaden the audience to the so-called conservative part of the red states, I think it might be not well advised to say, hey, we sweep in and show you our place, and you need to really see these, and this is what we think is right. I think a better idea for me is, and that's I found that strange. TikTok would go in and say, hey, what are the plays that you want to see, rather than like swooping in and saying, hey, this is what we have to offer to you. Because who knows, maybe we don't actually know what they want to see or need to see and urge for. The other comment is, I think rather than starting to like present other extreme views, uh, it could it's just much more, I don't know, to me it feels like starting with the common themes might be a better approach. We get to an understanding between otherwise um, very different groups. But how do you live with your family? How do you solve problems? How do you deal with violence in the family? Like the monologues. I mean, these are themes that are not divided between red and blue, and are really universal. And to me, it just does not feel good to just say, okay, we'll solve the problem by showing the other extreme. And yeah, that was just my little.
Yes, Kathy.
Just real quick, a very profound play that we saw a number of years ago was called Cherry Docks. It was at New Rep. I don't know if anybody saw it. It was just a 2-person play, as I recall, but it was about an imprisoned, I'll call him a skinhead, a neo-Nazi.
Soldier.
Well, right. And the court-appointed lawyer who was Jewish, who was supposed to find his story and try. And so here you had two individuals entirely on opposite sides of their background and their beliefs. And the whole play was about the interactions they had with each other, trying to find some understanding and respect for each other. And it was, to me, it was a profound play, just with the playing out of those two sides that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Well, we're just, we're coming to.
Let me jump in and just say one thing that I really did feel Oskar Eustis did not take account of, that the history of Western drama, even going back to the Greeks, a great deal of what happens in the conflict is between a protagonist and an antagonist. And you're led and manipulated by the playwright, to empathize with the protagonist and to reject the antagonist. So you look at Hamlet, you don't root for Claudius, okay, you root for Hamlet, for instance. So I think we would really need to confront that in some way, because so much of theater is rooted in that. Now, there are examples we've given today of much more balanced approaches, and somebody like Anna Devere Smith goes into a community and gets both sides. Another example, some of you may know of the Laramie Project, which really dealt with the killing of Matthew Shepard, and actually gets in and has sympathy for and interviews with the two people who were arrested for it, and with the police, so you get a more balanced approach. But by and large, the history of drama, and when he talks about conflict, you have to deal with protagonist, antagonist.
Thank you, Downing. Any final comments? I will just want to say that I hope that we will have an opportunity to be in the theater together and go to see plays and actually discuss them as we have in the past with our theater group. So I'm hoping that, you know, come this winter, we will be able to choose something. Well, this has been very interesting discussion. Any final words before I give you a quote on the exit? Okay, so I found this quote by Thornton Wilder, many of you know, wrote Our Town. And I thought this is probably a fitting way to end this discussion. And here's what Thornton Wilder had to say about theater. I regard the theater as the greatest of all art forms, the most immediate way in which a human being can share with another the sense of what it is to be a human being. So I think that kind of says some of the things that we've tried to get across today, but I appreciate all of you coming and participating. It's always fascinating to hear our differing points of view as Unitarian Universalists, to take apart the attempt to take apart a subject and learn from each other about something that's important to us all. So thanks again, and we'll hope to see you soon.